Today, let me ask you a question that sounds hypothetical, but doesn't feel hypothetical anymore. What if the United States right now decided to use its full military power against Iran? Not a warning strike, not a symbolic show of force, not a single night of airstrikes designed for headlines, but a real war. Because if that moment comes, let me be very clear from the start, this would not be a short conflict, and it would not stay contained. This would be the kind of war that shakes the Middle East at its foundations and sends shockwaves straight into American homes, American politics, and the global economy. And the reason is simple. Iran is not Iraq in 2003. Iran is not Libya. Iran is not a state waiting to collapse under pressure. Iran is a country that has been preparing for this exact scenario for decades. The first night, how the war would begin. If Washington gives the green light for a full-scale attack, the opening act would come from the sky. Stealth bombers lifting off from distant bases. Cruise missiles launched from submarines in the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea. Drones penetrating Iranian airspace, hunting radar systems and command centers. The first targets would be predictable, but devastating. Iran's nuclear facilities, its air defense networks, missile bases, communication hubs, senior command and control nodes. The goal would be speed and shock. Cripple Iran's ability to respond, blind its military, force Tehran to the negotiating table before it can organize a counterattack. On paper, the United States has the advantage, technologically, logistically, and operationally. But wars are not fought on paper. The assumption that could break everything. There is a dangerous assumption baked into many war scenarios, that overwhelming force equals quick victory. That assumption has failed before. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and against Iran, it may fail again, perhaps more dramatically than ever. Because Iran's strategy has never been to defeat the United States in a conventional head-to-head war. Iran knows it cannot outgun America. It cannot outspend America. It cannot outfly America. So it has built something else, a war machine designed for attrition, disruption, and pain. Iran's military, built to absorb the punch. For years, sanctions isolated Iran. Those sanctions didn't weaken Tehran's resolve. They reshaped it. Iran invested heavily in what it could build at home. Thousands of short and medium-range ballistic missiles, a growing arsenal of cruise missiles, swarms of attack drones, mobile launch systems designed to survive airstrikes. But more important than the hardware is the mindset. Iran's military doctrine is rooted in asymmetric warfare. Fight indirectly, strike unexpectedly, make the battlefield bigger than your enemy wants it to be. And that's where this war stops being about Iran alone. The immediate response, U.S. bases under fire. The moment Iranian leadership concludes that survival is at stake, retaliation would be swift and deliberate. American military bases across the Middle East would move from potential targets to active war zones. Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Iraq, Syria. These bases are not secret. They are mapped, studied, and rehearsed against. Missile launches would not aim to defeat the U.S. military outright. They would aim to send a message. You are not fighting on your own soil. Your soldiers are vulnerable. Your allies are exposed. Even limited damage, runways cratered, equipment destroyed, casualties inflicted, would create enormous political pressure back home. And Iran understands something very clearly. In modern America, wars are not lost only on the battlefield. They are lost on television screens and in public opinion. Israel. The conflict expands. Now let's talk about the moment this war truly explodes beyond control. Israel. If the United States launches a full-scale attack on Iran, Israel will not remain on the sidelines. From Tehran's perspective, Israel is not just an ally of Washington. It is part of the same strategic threat. That means Israeli military bases, cities, and infrastructure become potential targets, and Iran would not act alone. This is where the proxy network comes alive. Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the Shadow Army, Iran's greatest strategic asset is not inside Iran, it is outside. Hezbollah in Lebanon, armed with tens of thousands of rockets capable of striking deep into Israel. Houthi forces in Yemen, already proven capable of disrupting shipping in the Red Sea. Militia groups in Iraq and Syria, embedded, armed, and experienced. These groups give Iran what every weaker power dreams of, the ability to fight a multi-front war without formally declaring one. Northern Israel could come under sustained rocket fire. The Red Sea could become a danger zone for global shipping. U.S. convoys in Iraq and Syria could face constant attacks. At that point, this is no longer a bilateral conflict. This is a regional firestorm. Why this war refuses to stay small? Here's the uncomfortable truth policymakers don't like to say out loud. There is no clean off-ramp once this war begins. Every escalation forces another response. Every response widens the battlefield. Every widening battlefield pulls in new actors. Even countries that don't want war, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, would be forced to make impossible choices. Open your airspace to U.S. forces, or risk Iranian retaliation, stay neutral, or protect your own security alliances. In war, neutrality is a luxury few can afford. Europe, Russia, and China, watching, calculating. Now zoom out, way out. Europe would issue statements calling for restraint. Publicly, they would push diplomacy. Privately, they would brace for energy shocks and political fallout. Russia and China would not rush troops into the fight. They don't need to. Their strategy would be quieter and arguably more effective. Diplomatic cover for Iran, economic lifelines, intelligence cooperation, strategic patience. For Moscow and Beijing, a prolonged U.S. war in the Middle East is not a disaster. It is an opportunity, an America distracted, resources stretched, global focus diverted. This is how great power competition plays out in the modern era, not always through direct confrontation, but through managed chaos. The choke point that changes everything, the Strait of Hormuz. And now we arrive at the most dangerous pressure point of all, the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway through which nearly 1/5 of the world's oil supply passes every single day. Iran does not need to close it completely. It only needs to make it unreliable. Naval mines, fast attack boats, missile threats, drone surveillance. Even the perception of risk would send insurance rates soaring and tankers rerouting. Oil prices would spike, fast, not gradually, not over months, over days. And when oil prices surge, inflation follows. Food prices rise. Transportation costs explode. This is where a war thousands of miles away walks straight into American kitchens. The illusion of control. Every war plan begins with confidence. Confidence in intelligence, confidence in capabilities, confidence in timelines. But history teaches us something brutally consistent. The first phase of war is the only phase that goes according to plan. After that, friction takes over, misjudgments compound, and unintended consequences become permanent realities. The United States might win the early military exchanges, it might dominate the skies, it might cripple parts of Iran's infrastructure, but winning battles is not the same as controlling outcomes. And Iran's strength lies not in victory, but in endurance. Where we are right now. As we speak, none of this has officially begun, but the ingredients are already on the table. Mutual distrust, regional volatility, great power rivalry, domestic political pressure. History shows us that wars rarely start because leaders want catastrophe. They start because leaders believe catastrophe can be managed. That belief has ended badly before, and if the United States and Iran cross that final line, the world will not be watching a limited conflict. It will be witnessing the opening chapter of a war whose consequences no one, not Washington, not Tehran, not anyone, can fully control. And that brings us to the next question. What happens after the first shock fades? After the missiles fly? After the region is already burning? When the first missiles stop flying? When the smoke clears just enough for the world to breathe again? That's when the real war begins. Because wars are not defined by their opening strikes. They are defined by what follows: the slow grind, the political fallout, the human cost, and the choices leaders are forced to make when every option is bad. So let's go beyond the battlefield. Let's talk about what this war would really mean. The war beneath the war on the surface, this looks like a military confrontation, but beneath it is something far more complex, a struggle over power, credibility, and the future shape of the global order. For Washington, this war would not just be about Iran, it would be about sending a message to allies and rivals alike. That message would be simple: America still enforces red lines. But here's the problem. Every message sent abroad has an audience at home. Inside Washington, pressure without patience. If a full-scale war begins, the American political system immediately enters crisis mode. At first, there would be unity. There always is flags, speeches, pledges of resolve. But unity in America is fragile, especially in long wars. As casualties mount, as costs spiral, as oil prices rise and inflation bites harder, the questions would start coming fast. Why is this taking so long? What is the exit strategy? What does victory even look like? And here's the uncomfortable truth. No administration can clearly define victory against Iran without promising a long, messy, expensive commitment. Regime change, occupation, permanent containment, each option carries consequences that stretch far beyond a single presidency. Tehran's calculation, survival first, everything else later. Now let's shift perspective to Tehran. For Iran's leadership, this war would not be about pride or ideology, it would be about survival. And survival wars are the most dangerous kind. Iran's strategy would be brutally pragmatic: avoid decisive defeat, prolong the conflict, raise the cost for the United States and its allies. Wait for political fatigue to do what weapons cannot. Iran doesn't need to win outright. It just needs to outlast. History tells Iranian leaders something very clear. Foreign powers eventually leave. Regional players remain. The proxy war becomes the main war. As weeks turn into months, the front lines would blur. Hezbollah would not launch everything at once. It would pace itself, rocket fire calibrated to provoke but not trigger total annihilation, enough pressure to keep Israel mobilized, enough fear to paralyze daily life. In the Red Sea, shipping disruptions would continue, intermittent, unpredictable. In Iraq and Syria, U.S. forces would face constant harassment. No single attack would be decisive. That's the point. This is death by 1,000 cuts, and every cut carries political weight back in Washington. The civilian cost, where strategy meets reality. Now let's talk about the part that rarely gets enough airtime: ordinary people. In Iran, airstrikes would disrupt electricity, water systems, transportation, and healthcare. Civilians, not commanders, would pay the immediate price. In Israel, prolonged rocket threats would empty cities and strain civil defense systems. In Lebanon, already on the edge economically, Hezbollah's involvement could trigger national collapse. In Yemen, any escalation would deepen an already catastrophic humanitarian crisis. And far beyond the region, millions of people who have never heard of Hormuz or Natanz would feel the impact at the grocery store, at the gas pump, in their monthly bills. Wars today don't respect borders. They travel through supply chains. The global economy, fragile by design. This war would hit the global economy at its weakest point. High debt, persistent inflation, political instability. Energy markets are particularly vulnerable. Even partial disruption in the Persian Gulf would push oil prices sharply upward. That translates into higher transportation costs, more expensive food, central banks forced to keep interest rates high, slower growth, or outright recession. Developing countries would suffer first and hardest, but no one would be immune. Not Europe, not Asia, not the United States. This is how regional wars become global crises without a single shot fired outside the battlefield. The quiet winners. Who benefits from the chaos? Here's a question that rarely gets asked out loud. Who benefits from a prolonged US-Iran war? Russia gains a distracted West, higher energy prices, more leverage. China gains a weakened American focus, opportunities to position itself as a responsible alternative power, access to discounted energy. Arms manufacturers see demand surge. Authoritarian regimes learn a lesson. Instability buys time. This doesn't mean the war is orchestrated by outsiders. It means chaos creates space, and some actors know how to use it. 3 possible futures. So where does this road lead? Let me lay out 3 realistic scenarios, not predictions, possibilities. Scenario 1, the contained inferno. The war rages intensely but stops short of total collapse. No regime change, no full regional implosion. After months or even years of fighting, a fragile ceasefire emerges. Iran survives, bruised but standing. The US claims deterrence restored. The Middle East remains volatile, but familiar. This is the best bad outcome. Costly, painful, but survivable. Scenario 2, regional breakdown. The conflict spirals. Israel-Hezbollah turns into full-scale war. Gulf states are dragged in. The Strait of Hormuz becomes unusable. Global recession follows. Governments fall. Borders destabilize, extremist groups exploit the chaos. This is not World War III, but it is the kind of disorder that reshapes regions for generations. Scenario 3, the political collapse path. Military operations continue, but the decisive shift happens politically. Public support in the U.S. erodes. Allied unity cracks. Domestic crises overshadow foreign commitments. Negotiations begin, not from strength, but exhaustion. Iran emerges as a hardened, more radicalized state. America disengages, but credibility is damaged. No one wins, but everyone remembers. The question that changes everything. And now we arrive at the most important question of all. Not, can America defeat Iran militarily? It probably can, at least tactically. The real question is this: what kind of world does America want to lead afterward? One built on perpetual confrontation, or one shaped by restraint, leverage, and hard-earned diplomacy? Because once this war starts, there is no rewind button. Every missile carries history. Every decision echoes for decades. This would not be just another Middle Eastern conflict. It would be a defining chapter in the story of American power in the 21st century. And history is unforgiving to leaders who confuse strength with inevitability. The world is watching, the stakes are global, and the margin for error is thinner than ever. That's the reality, not of war as imagined, but of war as it truly is.